Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, directed by Miloš Forman. This 1975 film, of course, is considered a classic by many. It was highly regarded at the time it came out. It won 5 Oscars, cleaning up on Best Film, Director, Actor, Actress. I first saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on video in the 1980s, quite a while after its original release. It was an 18 certificate in 1975, so I was too young to see it then. It's a film I'd always meant to revisit, and seeing it on the big screen in this 4K restoration re-release was a real treat. As with many of the old classics, it feels renewed in a cinema. It really comes alive in that shared space. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed it, though there are some issues that I'm not sure about. I'll talk about these later. We keep getting these 4K restorations. This did look very good on a big screen, but it still somehow retains that wonderful 1970s aesthetic. It made me wonder, what exactly is being restored in a 4K restoration? I must admit that I've been thinking of these 4K restorations almost as a new digital creation, a process that perhaps adds pixels and artificially upgrades the image. But this isn't the case. This is just my ignorance. These restorations merely retrieve what was already there. Apparently, the original 35mm film negative holds far more visual information than the older video formats could ever display. So when they're scanned frame by frame at 4K resolution, it reveals the texture, color, and depth that audiences in 1975 would have seen on the cinema screen. It's more like cleaning a painting than repainting it. The sound, though, is a little different. The original 1975 release was in mono, and the new 5.1 mix inevitably involves more digital manipulation. Engineers have cleaned and expanded the track, separating dialogue, music, and the ambience to create a fuller sound field. It does work beautifully, but this is closer to a reinterpretation than a restoration, a respectful modernization rather than a literal return to the past. Anyway, I digress. This is just an interesting aside. I'm glad I know better what 4K restoration is, and it was certainly a treat to see it for the first time on a big screen. So let's start with the acting. These really are classic 1970s iconic performances. Jack Nicholson gives one of his great performances as Randall McMurphy, the rebellious outsider who shakes up this psychiatric institution. He's charismatic, he's infuriating, he's often reckless, but he's always alive, the spark of energy in an otherwise suffocating world. I'd forgotten how strong the supporting cast is. A young Danny DeVito and Christopher Lloyd. They make striking impressions. Their talents are already clear here. Louise Fletcher's Nurse Ratched remains one of cinema's most unforgettable villains. She radiates composure and quiet menace, and her authority is absolute. In the therapy sessions, she's so cold and performative, treating the patients as children rather than adults. And when she shames Billy by threatening to tell his mother what he's done, it's unbearably cruel. The film's central theme, the treatment of mental health, remains powerful today, at least to some extent. McMurphy brings out the best in the hospital's residents. He refuses to accept that they're any more crazy than those outside. And in that refusal, he restores some humanity and dignity to people that are struggling. The institution, by contrast, is patronizing and hierarchical. It's a machine that infantilizes its patients under the guise of taking care of them. Viewed literally, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a story about mental illness and the cruelty of psychiatric institutions in the mid-20th century. Read this way, it's both radical, but perhaps a bit limited. Radical because it exposes the dehumanizing nature of institutional power at a time when such treatment was rarely questioned, but also limited because its portrait of mental illness is deliberately broad, I think. The patients are not drawn with psychological complexity, but as recognizable types: anxious, stuttering, withdrawn, childlike. The details of diagnosis or treatment are secondary to the film's emotional and moral conflict. At times, the humour feels as though it comes at the expense of the patients rather than the system itself. From a modern perspective, this can feel crude, even patronising. Yet for many audiences in 1975, I'm sure it humanised people who'd previously been seen as invisible. I do have genuine mixed feelings about this. The audience at my screening laughed quite a lot. I did too, and I don't believe we were laughing at the character's mental illness. The humour still works, but much of it is rooted in warmth, absurdity, or rebellion. Yet there is a nuance here that feels harder to ignore today. Some of what once seemed liberating perhaps now carries an edge of discomfort, reminding us how easily laughter can blur the line between empathy and mockery. There is, however, another way to read the film, I think, that it isn't really about mental health at all. Here, mental illness functions as a metaphor for difference, for otherness, rather than a medical condition. The asylum becomes a symbol of conformity, and the patients represent anyone crushed by bureaucracy, social expectation, or even the violence of authoritarian control. In this interpretation, the film is less about the experience of mental illness than about society's fear of difference and the ways that authority seeks to repress whatever it can't understand. This metaphorical reading really gives the film an additional power, I think, though it also risks letting it off the hook for the contemporary problems that might be here. By turning madness into a symbol of nonconformity, the film gains moral and political clarity, but perhaps sacrifices psychological depth. It universalizes its message at the expense of realism. The result is a work that speaks eloquently about freedom, obedience, and individuality, yet only indirectly about the lived reality of mental illness. The film remains moving and profound, but what it captures most truthfully is not mental breakdown, but the human struggle to stay whole inside systems that mistake control for care. That said, the film's empathy still shines through. Its real target is not mental illness, but institutional cruelty. The way power can disguise itself as care. The laughter we share gradually becomes the laughter of liberation, the moment when these men, dismissed as insane, rediscover their capacity for joy, defiance, and selfhood. There's a striking comparison with the film that's just been released, I Swear, which I actually saw on the same day. I've also done a review of that film on the channel. It's interesting to observe how differently the two films approach human difference. Cuckoo's Nest treats mental illness symbolically, turning the asylum into an allegory for social conformity and the abuse of authority. Its power lies in its mythic scale, but that very scale distances it from the lived experience of mental illness. I Swear, by contrast, stays rooted in the real. It looks directly at one man's life with Tourette's. It never abstracts or romanticizes it. Its realism is sometimes conventional, even sentimental, but it's also humane and specific. Where Cuckoo's Nest uses metaphor to make a universal point, I Swear finds universality through authenticity, by showing the details of struggle and acceptance rather than turning them into symbols. In that sense, the two films mirror a wider shift in how cinema portrays mental and neurological difference. The 1970s needed parables to challenge institutions. Today we value first-person truth, representation, and accuracy. Cuckoo's Nest still resonates because its themes are timeless, but I Swear speaks more closely to the modern understanding of dignity, that people are not metaphors for society's ills, but individuals with their own stories. There's another question mark about the film. Some have suggested that Nurse Ratched's portrayal is misogynistic, arguing that it draws on an old cinematic trope of the woman in power as cold, castrating, and emotionally barren. The film contrasts her bureaucratic authority with McMurphy's masculine vitality, inviting us to side instinctively with his freedom over her control. In the context of the 1970s, this dynamic could perhaps be read about broader cultural anxieties on female authority and shifting gender roles. I think it's always worth asking these questions, but I'm not sure that I agree with this point of view. She's less a symbol of womanhood, but of institutional power itself, the face of a system that could just as easily have been male. She isn't weak or hysterical, but she's powerful and calculating. She could easily have been a man. I think that Ratched represents an institutional mindset rather than womanhood itself. She is the face of a system that suppresses difference and rewards submission. And that system definitely transcends gender, at least in my view. Overall, perhaps One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a film of its time, compassionate, angry, but perhaps somewhat problematic in its depiction of mental illness. It treats madness symbolically rather than clinically, which both enlarges and distorts its meaning. The film is serious, but it's very entertaining. The story is engaging and there's a lot of humour. There are some beautiful moments of warmth and camaraderie. I do think it remains an iconic piece of cinema, tragic, funny and unsettling. The 4K restoration brings it vividly to life, and seeing it again with an audience was a really enjoyable experience. If you've not seen this film, I do recommend it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.